He calls, this right here, successful intelligence. How to incorporate all of these into being successfully intelligent. Sternberger, 3 patties, always fresh, never frozen. All right, neurodiversity. So this is beyond IQ. Usually during this chapter I show parts of a movie called Rain Man. Won Best Picture in 1988 when I was 4 years old. But it kind of puts into account of one of the greatest autistic savants to ever live, which would be Kim Peek. It's not about Kim Peek, but they used him to kind of build this story where Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise travel across the country together. And it's really good. It puts autism out there for people to see. So, autism. A behavioral syndrome associated with differences in brain functioning and sensory responses, characterized by impaired social interaction, impaired verbal and nonverbal communication skills, repetitive or odd motor behaviors, and highly restricted interest and routines. So, yeah, this is interesting. You see this a lot, but occasionally people can be or register on the autism scale and not be impaired socially. Okay? And those people, there's a documentary out there about this guy named Daniel Tammet. It's called The Boy with the Extraordinary Brain. And he's not impaired socially about anything. And he is autistic. He learned Icelandic in a week, which is the hardest language to learn, or one of them. And then he went on TV and had a full interview while he did it. I mean, he went to Iceland, got interviewed in Iceland, in Icelandic, and he learned how to speak Icelandic 1 week prior. It's unbelievable. He doesn't see numbers as numbers. He sees them, as colors and shapes. And he's intimidated by the number 9 in his brain. It's like intimidating to him. It's large and overpowering. And it's an interesting documentary. Watch it if you can. An autistic savant, extraordinary talent or ability, usually in very limited areas such as math, art, or music. 1 in 10 people with autism are savants. You might have seen this guy, I can't remember his name right now, but he can look at a skyline, go home, and draw it freehand and without missing a beat. Like, you can look at something for 2 minutes, go home and draw the whole thing, and it's like a giant wall, like a mural of a skyline. So, little empirical research to support the claim that the majority of autistic people are mentally retarded. And that is one of our definitions, okay? So mental retardation is a disorder characterized by intellectual functioning that is significantly below average, usually defined as a measure of IQ of 70 or below, which could be caused by brain injury, disease, or genetic disorder. It's hard to measure intelligence in people who lack the ability to communicate or are not good at social interaction. One of my favorite podcasts I've ever heard was a Radio Lab podcast called Juiciverse. And it goes through, and a family had trouble communicating with their autistic child, and they didn't know how to do it. But he was obsessed with Disney movies. So he kept on saying one word. He could only say one word. It was Juiciverse, Juiciverse, Juiciverse. Finally, one day, I think his dad was sitting there while they were watching Little Mermaid, and the kid started saying Juiciverse a lot whenever Ursula says to Ariel, all I need is just your voice. Except the kid wasn't saying Juiciverse. The kid was saying just your voice. And then the parents actually start talking to their kid as if they were Disney characters, and guess what? He starts communicating with them. Starts talking to them. And it's such an awesome podcast. It's like unbelievable to hear that story, and you see these like moments of like, oh my gosh, you can't talk to your kids, you can't communicate to them, and then all of a sudden you find that key that allows you to get in there, into their brain, and lets them, and then all of a sudden you're communicating, even though that you have to act like Sebastian. Who cares? The Ravens Progressive Matrices Test measures intelligence in autistic children and adults. It was developed by Michelle Dawson, who's right here, who is autistic. Asperger's syndrome, behavioral syndrome characterized by varying degrees of difficulty in social and conversational skills, but normal to above average intelligence and language development, often accompanied by obsessive preoccupation with particular topics or routines. I have somebody in my family that has Asperger's. He was growing up, he's a huge guy. He's 6'6", 300 pounds. All right, he was super preoccupied, obsessed with creating his own stories and creating his own characters. It's like, his own sci-fi fiction stuff, and he loved it. That's all he did. Went through high school, played in band, graduated high school, went to community college, and now what he does is voiceovers for Audible.com. He reads sci-fi, fiction books, any book actually, and he records and makes a living off of it. All right? Basically turned his passion into what he does for a living. I wish all of us could do that. All right, the roles of genetics and environment in determining intelligence. So both heredity and environment are important in determining intelligence. This is so key, right? What's the answer whenever you see heredity and environment? Usually it's both. Okay? They go hand in hand, it's like 50%. Where psychologists disagree is how much of intelligence is determined by heredity and how much of intelligence is determined by environment. So genes as a blueprint has been replaced as genes as a data bank. So it's now known that our environment has a huge effect on which genes are actually turned on. So height. If you have a range of height that you'll be predicted to hit, usually that happens to you when you're younger, right? They say, oh my gosh, right now it's predicted that he or she is going to be above 6 foot tall. All right, if you're well-nourished and healthy, you might hit the maximum of your genetic height potential. If you're not, you might not. And that's the same with intelligence when it comes to genes and environment. Okay, so too many genes to narrow down the one that is involved in intelligence, at least not yet. That'll definitely happen. Obviously, if you haven't figured it out by now, by just reading in our book or me talking up here, psychologists love twin studies. All right, so identical twins share exactly the same genes because they were developed from a single fertilized egg. So same genes, which is huge, because you never get the same genes for a psychologist. And the fraternal twins are like any other pair of siblings because they developed in 2 separate fertilized eggs. The table on the next slide will help attribute this to intelligence. Then we have heritability, the percentage of variation within a given population that is due to heredity, and 50% is what we're talking about there. So let's look at this. So if you see here, identical twins reared together. So we have same genes, same environment. Difference in IQ scores shows effect of environment. So 0.86. Basically, we have a really strong correlation here. All right? Identical twins reared together. Same genes, same environment. Identical twins reared apart. Same genes, not together. 0.72. Still pretty high. Okay? Fraternal twins reared together. So basically, siblings reared together. So siblings, same environment, 0.6. Again, this is just brother and sister now. Siblings reared together, 0.47. Still decently high. Now we're starting to get a little bit low. Siblings reared apart, so brother and sister, brother and brother, sister and sister, whatever. Same, different environment, it drops off, right? Biological parent and child living together, 0.42, so there is some correlation there. Biological parent and child living apart, again, we drop off to 0.24. Adoptive parent and child living together, this is just no genetic anything, right? 0.24, same as this. No genetics again. Adopted siblings reared together, 0.32. So the environment actually did have more of an effect here. At least that's probably age related. So, yeah, again, psychologists love twin studies. All right, the roles of genetics and environment in determining intelligence. Again, you know, we'll just look at two different cultures here, but group differences in IQ scores. So Japanese and Chinese school children score above European American children on intelligence and achievement tests, especially math. In early childhood, the scores are nearly the same. The gap begins only when the child starts school and increases every school year thereafter. So more time in school, more time doing homework, experience more pressure and support from their parents to achieve academically. It's not genetics, but it's environment. We are the same genetically, but all of a sudden the environment changes, right, when they start school. And they take off, and then, I'm not going to say we flounder, but, you know, we don't experience the same pressure and hours of work, you know. I think for some reason the United States and our culture values the social aspect of things a little bit more. The roles of genetics and environment in determining intelligence. Basically here what you have to understand is the two pots analogy. Because the two environments are very different, no conclusions can be drawn about possible overall genetic differences between the plants in pot A and pot B. Okay? Again, you know, this is where, whenever you see all of this, and just really quickly, the environment has to be virtually identical. If it isn't, then it's virtually impossible to estimate the genetic differences. It is so hard to study the genetic differences of intelligence because the environment's always different. Okay? Culturally, individually, whatever you want to, I mean, it's so hard to do that. So, cross-cultural studies of group discrimination and IQ differences. Usually, I don't know if you know this or not, but you probably do, but if somebody is oppressed, they are probably considered to be less intelligent because they're not afforded the same environment that the non-oppressed person would be. So in many societies, average IQ scores are lower for the members of a discriminated against minority group. So we look at this group in Japan, so the Barakumen. So the case of the Barakumen people of Japan. Descendants of an outcast group for generations worked as tanners and butchers. Because they handled dead bodies and killed animals, they were considered unclean and unfit for social contact, forced to live in isolated areas. 3 million today in Japan. They're widely discriminated upon. They are the poorest people of Japan. They have the same exact genetics. Half as likely to graduate from high school or attend college. No racial differences between them and regular Japanese citizens. But their IQ scores are well below Japanese standards. So regular Japanese people, non-Barukumen, so range of IQ scores above 125, 23.3%, and then we have 2.6% here. Basically, this list is pretty much reversed, okay? 37.6% are scored below a 76. So are IQ tests culturally biased? Yes, they are. They always tend to favor the people from where the tests were developed. That's why that Army Alpha, Army Beta, oh, you're coming into Ellis Island test. You can't take that as anything, really. All right, last slide right here. We got stereotypes undermine performance. So Claude Steele, which I love his name, is an American social psychologist best known for his work on stereotype threat. So stereotype threat, what is it? A psychological predicament in which fear that you will be evaluated in terms of a negative stereotype about a group to which you belong creates anxiety and self-doubt, lowering performance in a particular domain that is important to you. These are all examples of it. Some of them are odd, right? But my favorite one is a title of one of my favorite movies, which is White Men Can't Jump. I love that movie. Is it a stereotype threat? 100%. Now, is that the greatest example of a stereotype threat? Probably not. But it's the one that sticks out to me to where I could reference it, understand it, and understand that it could create doubt in you because it's such a generality, right? It's such a stereotype. Like, okay, white men can't jump. All right, then why try to jump? Then why try to jump? Even though you love dunking. So it's just something to think about. This exists in this world. You've heard one before. I know you have. So be looking out for that. That's an easy one to remember for some reason for me. Claude Steele. I love his name. And stereotype. So boom, we're done. Hit me with that theme song and I get out of here.